So welcome to this session that is looking at how cosmology guides farmers in the Shashe community in Zimbabwe. My name is John Wilson, and I've been asked to moderate this group, and I'm speaking to you from the outskirts of Harare in Zimbabwe, where we are having yet another very nice storm. I think the cosmology this year is looking very kindly on us because we're getting fantastic rains for a change. So we have three representatives from the Shashe community to share their perspectives and practices. They are Amai Elizabeth Mpofu, Baba Nelson Mudzingwa, and Amai Vongai Dube. Nelson will give us a background presentation. Then you'll be able to ask questions directly. You can put your hand up or whatever, unmute, and ask them some questions. The plan after that is to break into groups so that you can discuss this topic more intimately. We will then hear a few points coming up out of the group work and finally open the workshop to more general discussion. We have 90 minutes if we want, but let's see how it goes. First, a tiny bit of historical context. Cosmology was at the heart of African cultures and their relationship to the land and farming all around the continent for centuries. Much of this got completely lost in the colonization process that mostly took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. It also continued to get further lost in the post-colonial experience, where the main thrust of governments has been development according to a Western mold. The more colonized the country, the more this got lost, and Zimbabwe was highly colonized. To this day, this topic is a highly contentious one in my experience, from having worked all over the continent. Spirituality and belief systems can be like this. I've been in a number of workshops, for example, sometimes facilitating, where this topic has been discussed. In nearly every case, it was a very emotional discussion. I believe this is partly due to misunderstandings and crossed wires that tend to happen. But I also believe this is because it taps into deep roots. And we're going to tap some of those roots with our three guests. Let me introduce them. Amai Elizabeth Mpofu is first and foremost a farmer and one of the founders of the Shashe farming community during the land reform program. She has also taken on the struggle to give smallholder farmers, and especially women farmers, a voice. To that end, she was the founding chairperson of ZIMSOF, the Zimbabwe Small-Scale Organic Farmers Forum, and led the organization for many years. In 2014, ZIMSOF began hosting La Via Campesina, and Elizabeth became general coordinator of La Via Campesina, a post she still holds today. She also founded more recently the African Women's Collaborative on Healthy Food Systems. I've known Elizabeth for many years and really admire the way she persists on amplifying the voice of farmers in many different forums. Vongai Dube has also been part of the Shashe community since settling there in 2000. She is a local activist for agroecology in her community, always willing to share her creative approach to growing food. She has diverse orchards and grows a variety of vegetables that ensures excellent nutrition for all her family. She also has fish ponds, and she's a keen seed saver and guardian. At the entrance to her home, she's built her own mini Great Zimbabwe rock structure, which illustrates her connection to cultural and spiritual history. Nelson Mudzingwa went to an agricultural college in the late 80s and learned mostly the wrong kind of farming. He soon recognized this and in the 90s learned a lot about agroecological farming, working with civil society organizations, while also rerouting himself in culture and spirituality. In 2000, he became a full-time smallholder farmer and hasn't looked back since then. He's the general coordinator for ZIMSOF and has also played an active part in La Via Campesina in recent years. I would say he's become one of Zimbabwe's leading experts on water harvesting through the practices on his own family farm. His farm produces whatever the rainy season and is a fine example of how to deal with climate change. So I'm now going to hand over to Nelson Mudzingwa to give us some background on this topic of how cosmology is guiding farmers in the Shashe community. So over to you, Nelson.
This has been a very important point for me to express this very deep issue that we are going to talk about, which is all about our understanding spiritually. And I will have to bring back to all participants the very simple two issues that I'm going to highlight here. And one of those issues that I'm going to highlight is just to start by thinking about a tree. I think all of us know very much a tree. It has roots which are under the soil. It has a trunk which is above the soil. It has branches, and it has leaves, and it has fruits. And that's how it is structured. And if you look in the forest, you're going to see lots of different kind of tree species that are growing together, and they're not fighting each other, because that's more like a world which they are surviving. Then there is another second issue that I would want to bring to your attention, is the whole discussion of what are the shapes that God has created. I should have just brought this as a question to you all, to say, what is this shape that you understand God has created? But I don't think I have that time to listen to the answers. But what I would want to bring to your attention is that there is only one shape that the spirit of earth has created. The spirit of earth has created a round shape, which is very easy to clean because it has no corners. It's only the humankind that has brought the corners, the hexagon, the rectangles and the squares. All those were brought by men. But as far as God is concerned, the spirit of the earth is concerned, there's only one shape, which is the round shape. Yeah? You can look at the moon, it's round. You look at the sun, it's round. You look at the earth, it's round. You look at our bodies, we don't have corners. We have got this round shape, which illustrates that there was that value that the spirit of the earth gave to the round shape. But I want to draw our attention very much closer to the experiences of the Shashe community, in as far as that understanding of cosmology is concerned. Here, when we're referring to cosmology, what we are saying is, how do you relate to your spirit? How much is it that do you understand in the spiritual world? And how much related, in as far as communication is concerned, do you actually then go into your spiritual world to the extent that you don't ever have that communication breakdown? Because there should be that illustration of what I have alluded before: the roots, the trunk, the branches, the fruit, the leaves, and the fruits. And that is very clear kind of an illustration. And then, in as far as spirituality is concerned, how much connected are you in that knowledge, understanding, and how is that building onto your life? Not necessarily your own life, but it goes back to even to talk about the community where you are coming from, to talk about even the district that you are coming from, even to talk about even the nation that you are coming from, or even the continent that you are coming from. Because the way reasons, where you find, if you want to bring the whole world into one unit, it is very possible to bring Asia closer to Africa, to bring Europe closer to Africa, to bring America closer to Africa. And there are indicators, if you look back to the world map, that these just break away. But the earth had some reasons to say this kind of a community must stay here, and this kind of a community must stay here. And here to me, I'm going to share the experiences of the Shashe community and how they've otherwise been giving that value to their cosmology. If I can have the slides. Now, if you, on the first slide is just to introduce myself, and this is how we have mobilized farmers to value their spirituality and cosmovision to achieve food sovereignty, because this is the target goal that entirely the whole world is looking at when we are talking about alleviating poverty and achieving food security, not necessarily food security, but food sovereignty, because that the security is just to even give whatever you want to give. And then people say we have enough, but which is that enough? What is the nutrition content, and where is it coming from, and how has it been produced? Those are issues which we would want to look at. But when we look at food sovereignty, we are talking about that control and that understanding and that knowledge to say, this is what I want to grow, and for purposes of me to achieve certain targets that I have to achieve, suppose as a family farmer or is just as a community, because here in Africa we have that value of what we think is very important in as far as food is concerned, and how we organize ourselves in terms of production from our traditional structures that have ever been there. So this is just to introduce the topic. Yeah, as the next slide is coming, and this is just specific to the Shashe local farms experiences. I would want to bring the attention on the struggle of land in Zimbabwe. And the struggle of land in Zimbabwe is it was more like being pioneered by the liberation struggle, and who were the guardians of the liberation struggle, and why that spirit was almost driving that agenda to say the Zimbabweans must have access to land. And having alluded to that, I will not go back to the struggles that we have gone to, but I will go specifically to the Shashe block of farms, where in 2002, following the successful Zimbabwean land reform program, we saw almost over 380 smallholder farmers coming into Shashe block of farms, and this is.
Nelson, are you there?
I lost connection.
You're back.
I lost connection.
It might be safest to turn your video off for now. Just
can
to
you hear
kind
me?
of. Yeah, we can hear you. But if you could turn your video off, and if it's playing up again, then it'll prioritize the sound, so we'll still be able to hear you if nothing else. Yeah.
Yes. I was talking about the 380 families, and on a land that has been before for cattle ranching, and just producing meat, and much of that meat was for export and not contributing to the local food reserves. And this area being a total of 15,020 hectares, and it is, if you want to come closer to it on the map, I think you are seeing that where the arrow is pointing to is indicating that this is part of Ward 6 and 33 of Masvingo district, and that is in Masvingo province, and to the north of Masvingo district. And this is an area which is very dry, that receives average annual rainfall of 400 millimeters. We say this is what is received when the season is very, very good. Yeah, we are part of what we call the sub-catchment area, which is within the Runde catchment area. On the photo, you can see where we are, and the rivers that are actually coming through ourselves is Okwe, which is being fed by Shashe River, and then it connects to Runde, and then it flows to Sabe, and it goes to the ocean, which means lots of water that can just flow and then leave that community without water. But what is that spirit of water talking to the people within the Shashe block of farms? And as far as the effects that might be brought about with the water that might flow through that community and leave it very, very dry, even suppose it comes as a flood, and what happens next, and is an issue that we have to discuss as we go further. Then, yeah, the next slide is actually indicating specifically that you find the Shashe River is flowing to the dam, which is further down, which is mostly the dam, which is to the west of the block of farms. Then within the block of farms, we have very small tributaries. Yeah, there is Mswambwe, there is Swaini, there is Ishirava, and they flow into Shashe River. And these tributaries, if you go into to their close attention, you will find some of them are coming from springs that have ever been flowing, even way before when we occupied the land. And there are stories that have ever been talked about on these tributaries where there were spirits of the water flowing into these small rivers, and no one. And then when we came in, I decided to take that into cognizance and give that value into the values that they have to get from the mankind. And here, the linkages of the block of farms, you find it is connected to Masvingo town and through a gravel road, and to the northeast end of the block is about 20 kilometers, where you can connect again to the road going to Harare, Masvingo, by Bridgestad Road, and giving that access of this community to be one of those pilot communities where anyone can reach and anyone can learn from the best practices of how it is actually linking itself to their cosmovision and spirituality. I want to go down to how this whole idea came about, where we talk about cosmology. The way we were brought up was coming through some experiences of one of the grassroots non-governmental organization that was called the Association of Zimbabwe Traditional Environmental Conservationists, which was founded by spirit mediums, war veterans, and traditional chiefs. And for the reason to develop this kind of organization was to try to bring into the values that have been bestowed onto the social world in terms of how resources would even contribute to the living mortal beings, and how that communication channel will ever been that value. So we have had experience where we give a lot of value to what we call the three worlds. The three worlds, one might maybe take it into other interest and say why these three worlds, but we want to give some more detail on what exactly do we mean when we're talking about the three worlds. We have the natural world. The natural world is what we see is the flora and fauna, the living plants in their diverse species and in the way they've associated to each other in the forest, and the way they are connected to the values that the human beings can attach to, and the animals that you find, the wild animals, in which we have even further as indigenous people given to as our totems, because you find every clan or every community, there could be a specific totem that could be a dominant, some kind of, and otherwise even having that chieftainship, because that linkage to a specific kind of a wild animal that is that connection to that local community. So the natural world to us has got lots of different values that we derive from it. Then we have the social world. The social world is talking about the mankind. We have so many different kind of languages that are spread world over, and which some of them very minute, and some of them almost like disappearing, and some of them which are almost becoming very dominant too. But the society, the social world that we're talking about here is where we want to have that value of each small, big, whatever, kind of a society that has that value which we will have to maintain, the cultural values contained, the language that it speaks, the way it is connected to the spirit, the values that we have to attach to that kind of a society. As people with one blood, no matter what color, how do we relate to each other and how do we survive as a community? Then the last is the spiritual world. The spiritual world is that we don't see. It's not easy to see life after death. And that means it is a different kind of a world. If one goes to that world, what happens and how is that clustered? We find we have these generations again into it, and we have these clans again into it, and we have the whole nation or the whole community into this, the way it is inspired to be able to speak with the spiritual world, to able to communicate and pass on messages. And so this is what is actually inspired the farmers in the Shashe local farms to learn and to understand and to appreciate these values and to try to put them into practice with those distinctions that one has to look into. We saw some indicators as we came into the block of farms. What we realized was that we were beginning a process where we said, no, we wanted to develop arable lands, we wanted to start to farm, we wanted to do all different kinds of construction activities, but there were indicators that we saw which were very, very particular that we have to, that reminded ourselves to revise our strategies and the way we have to approach nature. The massive clearing for land for cropping, we saw it exposing the soil to erosion. The cutting down of trees, we saw it impacting on the water cycle. Yeah, the bare ground, yeah, was definitely exposed to loss of runoff, like you can see on the photos, that there was a lot of soil erosion that led even into gully formation, and these were indicators that we were not communicating well with our spiritual world, and therefore there was that need to start to rethink and to bring all the traditional leaders on board. The traditional leaders on board, which what we mean is you need to have the chiefs on board, you will need to have the spirit mediums on board, and you need to have the elders that have all the oral history that has been happening into the community that they know and to where they are actually settled. And so we started to have these dialogues to try to mobilize each other to understand and to clear all these tasks by action, by having a general consensus of what actions we have to take as resettled farmers onto a new land that has ever been calculated maybe for the last 50 years, and what are the responses that you need to bring about, and how are you going to be connected to the spirit of that land so that at least you can have that room to be someone who is well settled into that specific community. So these were some of those indicators, like I alluded before, that, you know, the Shashe River was almost like drying, lots of siltation going on, and the farmers, those that had some innovation, began to start to do a lot of record keeping and collecting some data on how the rainfall pattern was behaving, and all these were was enough evidence for a strategic decision that the local community has to take. And that strategic decision that this local community had to undertaken was just based on their holistic kind of thinking, where they are not linear and they do not want to take everything as business as usual, but business is unusual, and considering the factors that there is no one size fits all here, but we have to take into account all the practices that we have to learn from those little farmers, those that might have the experiences that we want to take into on board and help you to discover a new path of taking action. This is just the background into how you would find we organized ourselves, and we have now taken on board our Cosmo vision on that understanding that we are a people who have inherited some kind of life which has kept generations and generations, but which then has to look deep into how life is beginning to change, and to the indicators that we see, the climate that is changing, the food shortage that we're seeing, the diseases that are mushrooming, and how do we go back to connect ourselves into our spiritual world, and what are those issues that we have to consider as a people, and how do we have to take that forward as a community, and what practices that we have to demonstrate, which will then reconnect us to the grassroots, reconnect us to our spiritual world. Thank you so much for your listening.
Great, thanks very much, Nelson, for that. And it's a very beautiful thing, this revival and reconnection that is beginning to happen, I think across the continent, not hugely, but I sense that it's starting to happen. And I think it's a wonderful thing, because it's across Africa, people were always very connected to the land, connected to nature. You only have to look at all the sacred natural sites all over the continent that used to exist. And these represented this connection with nature, with cosmology, and represented that Cosmo vision and that deep sense of connection. But it has been a very brutal experience, the colonial experience, in many ways. And it's a task to bring that back. And I think what they're doing in Shashe is starting to bring that back, combined with a very practical approach to farming from an agroecological perspective. So thanks a lot for that, Nelson. Now, before we go into groups where you'll have a chance to chat a bit more, there's a chance for some questions. If you'd like to, unfortunately, we've lost Mpofu Elizabeth. Her connection is a heavy storm and she's lost her connection. But she said on WhatsApp to me that she'll try and reconnect when she can. But if you've got any questions for Nelson before we break into groups, please, I think maybe the easiest, you can just unmute and speak, but there's so many of us, it might be easiest to put your hand up and then I can mention your name. Any questions or quick reflections before we break into groups? And for those who haven't, if you could put your, because we're going to look at this in terms of continents in the group work. So if you haven't put the first two letters of your continent next to your name, you can go to the 3 dots on your picture and click on that, and then you can rename yourself with the first 2 letters of your continent next to your name. And then those breaking you into groups will be able to do so according to continent.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify the meaning of cosmovision. Is it simply bringing back an inclusion of the spiritual world along with the natural world and the social world?
Nelson, would you like to respond?
Yes,
I mean, it's an English word, and we're talking about
yes,
things. Go ahead.
It's not about just bringing up. This is a very complex kind of an issue that we are dealing with here. Connecting is all about your head, heart, and feet feeling. what exactly are you going to do as a person? Suppose you have been inspired to feel that I must have that connection to my spiritual world. If you want to have that connection to your spiritual world, there must be that action that you need to take at the end of it, and which is to bring about that connection, because without action, or you having just that feeling to say I want to and not acting, will not bring you closer to. So when you are dealing with the social world, the natural world, and the spiritual world, there must be indicators that you are actually part of the process and you have become very visual in terms of how the natural world will look at you, how the social world will look at you, and how even the spiritual world will look at you. And then that linkage will bring about the results that you might be inspiring. It's not about the book. The book is there as part of reference that is to bring you closer to by referring to some topics, but it is about your spirit, the way you feel it.
Okay, I hope that helps, India Hamilton.
Yeah.
I don't know, Elizabeth's back with us. Am I in Pofu? Did you want to say anything around how you see cosmovision? How would you interpret cosmovision?
Okay, John, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I think a lot has been said by Nelson, but what I just want to add, as per my experience, is that looking at how it has been for the decades, for the past decades, how were our ancestors living? How were they so friendly with the environment? All those issues. The relationship of the environment, the soil, the water, and all the species which were growing together for a purpose. And how were they maintaining these species and their culture, looking at the cosmovision itself, as Nelson was just elaborating? I think one has to wonder what has gone bad, what did we do which led to the environment, the culture which we are living right now. And these are the areas where we are really trying to revive, looking at how our ancestors have been living sustainably. Because right now, if we look, John, what is happening, we have totally lost our cultural values and norms. Yet when we come back to see the African perspective, what is an African person, what resembles the African person, these are all issues which I think the cosmovision, the cosmology one has to reflect in mind. And if we look at the relationship of cosmology and agroecology, we look at the principles of agroecology, where we are talking of recycling of biomass. Yet our ancestors were also doing the same. They never had a moment to think of purchasing fertilizers. The functioning of biodiversity. These are the relationship which we really want to look at when we talk about cosmology. And looking at the sustainability of the livelihoods of a person, there's no way we can leave out all these aspects which Nelson was talking, and a few which I have already added. And also looking at how we protect and improve our livelihoods. So the cosmology itself, yes, some may say it's a it's scientific, it's scientific perspective, but to me, this has been the way of life which the Africans, the people of race of any country, of any region, any continent. You go to Mexico, they also have their culture. You go to Indonesia, to Asia, They also have their culture. You go to India. These are all issues which we really want to look at, to reflect. Then we can come up with a good answer for cosmology and how it links to the agroecology farming systems, which we are talking today to improve the livelihoods of the people. Thank you, John.
How often does one do that? I think, thank you very much, Amai Mpofu. Let's break into groups now. Time's ticking on. If you're ready, Jade, for that. So we're going to break into, if you haven't put your continent letters, it doesn't matter. You'll just go into a random group. You'll join one of the continents. But if you could look at it in terms of your continent and think about how, what are your experiences with cosmology and farming within a European perspective, or within a North American perspective, or in Australia? I don't know what continents we've got here. And just, yeah, I mean, it's really a chance for you to just share some thoughts around this. So don't be too bound by that question. But when you come back, let's share some experiences with cosmology and farming coming from different continents, from different places. So I'm just thinking about the time. If we do it for 20 minutes, and that gives us a bit of time, because we've got an hour and a half altogether. We've got till 1/2 the hour. So let's do that for 20 minutes. Of course, it's not nearly enough, and you could talk about this for ages, but at least give you a chance to exchange a little bit. So when you're ready, Jade, if you could send everybody off into groups, and then we'll be back. Well, Ed Mack, when you come back, we'll go with your question. I see your hand up now. Sorry, I hadn't seen it. But when you come back, or is it about the task? Ed Mack.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Nelson. It's okay. It was about the water spirits and how they've guided the revival of the riverbed and the vegetation. So it can definitely wait. And thank you. Okay.
All right. When you come back, maybe you'll bring it up in your group. All right.
Okay, I'll pop everyone into groups now.
Okay. Off you go. See you in 20 minutes. Okay. Welcome back. So we've got just over 20 minutes. And I think we can just start off by briefly sharing any points that came up in your group. I mean, of course, there are far too many groups to share everything from all the groups, but anything you'd like to share, anything that struck you, any interesting point that came up. So just open the floor up. You could either raise your hand in your window or on the list on your the orange hand or the red hand or whatever it is, blue hand. There we go, UK Ed Mack. Yeah, go ahead.
We had some really interesting conversations about the sort of reconnection to more kind of experiential and respectful observation of natural processes and tapping into those more intuitively, and how we can learn from cultures that haven't lost that, to reintegrate that into an agroecological approach to complement the sort of more analytic and scientific aspects, and perhaps to inform them. I mean, I say because I suppose, from in my own experience, I'm just doing a master's dissertation on something intercropping, in fact, and I got the idea for it by trial and error and observing and seeing what happened, and just going back to the same plot every day and just observing the changes, then that inspired an experimental design where I'll be able to have something that I can share that will hopefully be applicable in other contexts. So I guess I just wanted to ask Nelson about the river and what a little bit more about. Be fascinating to hear a little bit more if there's time about that process of tuning into those water energies that had been lost when the river dried up in summer, and how they went about sort of tuning into what the river needed in order to revive its vitality there.
Nelson, would you, there are no other hands up at this stage. Would you like to just chip in there, and then we'll go back to hearing from others?
Oh, yes. I was talking about the Shashe River, and I've indicated on the photo how it got silted. Yeah, and when it got silted, it actually silted the deep pools where you would find, if you understand what we call mermaids. These are spirits of the waters. Yeah, the spirit of the waters. They've got some places that are sacred into the river, which they have to stay and which they have to protect it. But they've got a very important role that they play in as far as managing the water cycle is concerned. So that connection, that communication, that willingness to be able to identify that communication breakdown was very, very important for us in our community to be able to relate then to the rivers. But then we had to see very mysterious kind of behavior of the river, whereby one would then see all the sand that could have been deposited into that kind of a depot being drawn out of the river and piled somewhere else outside the river, which is a very clear indication that the spirit has actually responded to your needs, yeah, as much as that you have reconnected. So these are some case studies that one might share if you want to go deeper into this spirit of the soil, the spirit of water, the spirit of seeds, the spirit of the whole biological diversity, the way that it connects it to the social world.
Great, thanks for that, Nelson. Anyone else like to share something that came up in your group? Yes, go ahead, Helena.
Something came up very strongly was the fact that we are so used to having scientific linear language dominate everything that we think and do, and that somehow we have to overcome that and reestablish our relationships with other beings, by which we were talking about working with plants, for example, and the need for communication. But this business of the scientific linear language dominating is really something that we have to overcome in Europe. And just one thing that really struck me in what Nelson said, this was just a personal observation. He talked about the three worlds, and the Quichua in the potato park in Peru also have their three worlds. And what's so wonderful about that is that the human is alongside the spiritual and the wild or the animal world. And we have to recover that relationship, because at the moment we put ourselves at the center, and that just seems such good guidance for us. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Helena. Anyone else like to say something that struck them in the group work that came up?
Could I ask Nelson a question?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I wondered, Nelson, if it would be possible, I'm keen to know how the Cosmovision, how you integrate that with children and young people as they're growing up. It's something that I feel a lot of that came out in our group, that I said, I think a lot of our young children, a lot of our children don't get very much a message in the UK other than one of doom and despair most of the time. Can you, how culturally do the children engage with this? I did ask that really badly, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yep, no, I'm sure he does. And also I think Elizabeth's with us as well. So if you'd like to, either of you'd like to come in.
In a family, when we are talking about a household is a family unit whereby you have some kind of organization where that family unit is a structure. You know, there are many families that do not have a structure, but here in the Shashe block of farms, the emphasis is that to establish a structure where there is that protocol to say who is chairing what we are doing, who is reporting, the secretary, who is the treasurer, who is accounting, who are committee members, and that is the family unit. The children are committee members who have a role to play that they have to do every day. And that kind of training they get every day will make them connect to the whole system. It's not about, maybe suppose they're going to school, you want to let the teachers then educate your children what is life. It's the responsibility of the parent to make sure that at least my children are able to be informed of what is important in as far as life is concerned. And you have to build, they say charity begins at home, whereby the parent has got that responsibility to educate for as long as you have the heart feeling and you are pioneering that journey for your children to be able to understand more, and then they will have to take back, to take with them that legacy, which is very, very important, like this discussion on cosmology, which is what connects them to the spirit and what makes them of value on earth.
Thank you. Yeah.
Elizabeth, do you want to add anything? I know you've got grandchildren running around at home. I'm not sure if Elizabeth's connection is good enough. Okay, well, not to worry.
I was
muted.
Okay.
There's
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay, okay. So I just wanted to add on that, to give an example of myself here. I have 9 or almost 10 grandchildren, and during school days, they are not with me, but every holiday, they come here at Shashe, because that is the policy which we have developed, which we have established and agreed, that every holiday, the grandchildren should be here. They should also learn what we are really doing, not necessarily to learn at the school, as Nelson was saying, but they have to learn from home, although at school they will also have some teachings about agriculture or about the cosmovision, the culture itself. So it is very, very...
Okay, Elizabeth's connection has left us, but I think you got the idea there. It's and that's still, I mean, it's getting lost a bit, but it's still there within Zimbabwean culture, is that even urban children, most people have kumusha, which is home, and go and visit grandparents and so on. So there's a lot of room to revive all of this, and I think personally, I think the time is ripe for this, because we've had so many approaches that have been dominated by a kind of Western mindset, and people are asking so many questions about this, and where are young people, and a lot of young people, certainly in Zimbabwe, and I think many parts of Africa, are not rooted. They're kind of lost because of losing that sense. I think the time is very ripe for this rerouting that Nelson and Elizabeth are talking about. And I think there are more and more young people who are keen and interested and want to take that on. Any more questions, thoughts?
My thought when Nelson was speaking, he mentioned the heart and the head, and Julia Wright, who's in this session and did the session on subtle agroecologies, taught me that there's a third, there's the hand. So heart, head and hand, kind of bringing that together. And yeah, and a question for you, John, is what does Cosmovision mean to you?
Reconnecting, rerouting, it's, I mean, I've worked in the so-called development sector for years and years, often as a sort of outlier, trying to articulate alternatives. And I don't know, 20, or so years ago, I realized that's what's been missing. It's all about this functional approach. It's all about poverty alleviation, which itself is a little bit insulting anyway. But so we've got these millions and millions of dollars of development aid being pumped everywhere for poverty alleviation, and it takes nothing, doesn't take into account any of that aspect of people's lives, and there are a lot of, I mean, I don't want to go into controversial territory because this is a controversial topic, but I think religions need to just open up. And I think it's about misunderstandings. I mean, I'll just give you an example in Kenya, where they've done some work. There's the African Biodiversity Network, which does a lot of this sort of work that Nelson's and Elizabeth are talking about. And I remember having this long talk. They were reviving a sacred natural site there. And I had a long chat to a devout Christian who said at the beginning, she would have nothing to do with sacred natural sites. It was against Christianity. It was against, it's not at all. And she realized. So there's a lot of sorting out that has to be done, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of there's still this sort of belief that cosmovision, spirituality, African spirituality is superstitious. It's about going backwards. And some of that is quite deep rooted. I know people someone in Venda in South Africa. She was who talking in a similar way to Nelson and Elizabeth, and her family disowned her. So they said she was the devil. So it's a very complex issue and a very tough one. But I think there isn't really a need for conflict on this, because I think religions, Christianity, these things can work together. And it's about opening our minds to it. We're kind of getting towards the end. I was going to give Nelson and Elizabeth a final word to say something. Anything else from anyone else in the audience?
John, I'd like to say, I think cultivating and sharing our sense of wonder and our sense of gratitude really helps. It opens people's eyes to what they walk past and what they walk through. And it brings joy, and it helps people to cultivate, or it inculcates a sense of awe, and that is a pathway back or forward.
Great. Back and forward. Yeah, exactly. I think it's about, there's that wonderful image in Ghanaian culture where you're looking back as you move forward. And I think that's what it's about. Thank you for that comment. Very nice.
Can I just ask, sorry.
Go ahead, Flora.
If there's any advice that Elizabeth and Nelson can give us on other continents with regard to cosmovision and the return to our roots, how to get there and how to develop it?
That's a big question. Big ask. Any other sort of final question to them, and then I'll hand it over to each of them to just say a last few things, including your trying to give that advice, Flora. Anything else?
I have a question. Yes.
Go ahead.
Just if they would be willing to share, again, I don't know if the time container allows for this, but like a specific cultural practice that they have that is born out of like connecting, like reminding themselves of their cosmology. So that's often how I experience ceremonies and rituals. It's like reminding ourselves who we are within our cosmology. Just something that could inspire, because I find often there can be universal aspects to these kinds of things too, that it could inspire us to find something similar in our culture or listen for what might want to come forward.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so over to Nelson. Would you like to say a few words? And if you can respond to that, give a specific cultural practice as an example that that you use, and if you have any advice for people in other continents, and then we'll go to Elizabeth and end off. Go ahead, Nelson.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Let me go back to maybe before going to the cultural practices, but just go back to the whole discussion on cosmology. That if you look at the soil, is occupying much bigger area of the Earth's surface, and water is almost, in fact, the water is the biggest. It's occupying almost 70% of the Earth's surface, and the soil occupying that difference. And that's naturally how God, the spirit of the Earth has created that structure. It has reasons. It's not just guesswork, but it has reasons, and that is what is causing all the balancing of what we see today in as far as the universe is concerned. And therefore, going back again, we have to look back into what exactly are the practices that you have to look at when you look at the water, the practices that you look at when you look at the soil, and the practices that you look at when you look at even the seed and even the whole biological diversity that you are surviving on. And zeroing on to the later question, let me say that we have what we call rituals and ceremonies that we perform. The rituals and ceremonies are very, very important to us. These are the connection points that makes us able to communicate to the spirit. And we have to prepare some kind of ritual where we have to bring in the seeds that we keep, not the seeds that we buy from elsewhere, but the seeds of the small grain. In particular, we're talking about what we call the boko, and which is one of our traditional seed varieties that connects us to the spirit, and it has to prepare a traditional beer. And that traditional beer will have to be a medium that we use, and with our snuff, we can be able to communicate with our spirit. It's raining right now, very heavily, so maybe my communication can break down. So you find this kind of connectivity being necessitated once it is with the elders, those that have that responsibility to lead the process, to be able to deliver the message to where it is supposed to be delivered, and being able to narrate the process. And where I started before to say, do we understand the roots, the stem, the branches, and the leaves and the fruits? That linkage is for one to be able to communicate the message through and be able to say the true message, which has to be accepted by the spirits. And usually there should be answers which are very, very needed. There is no that issue to say the answer delays. Yeah? And we go into specific practices where we have to collect as much as possible water into the soil. It's your responsibility as a person that you don't have to lose any drop of water. All this rain that we are receiving right now, we're collecting it into the soil so that we rejuvenate the spirit of water in the soil and the soil spirit so that it is able to sustain life. Where there is water and soil, there is life. And it means you have to have that connection. But many of us have come in with some strategies and methods that fight that interrelationship of the soil and water, which disturbs, and which even go further to even poison, life into the soil and life into the water, and which damages the spirits and which disconnects completely ourselves from the life on earth.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Nelson. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, a final word from you before we close the session. If you're still there and if we can hear you, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, maybe briefly, what I can advise is that we know very well the topic we are addressing today is not an easy work to do. I know that we have quite a lot of issues which we really want to bring back. But step by step, we can start small and grow bigger and achieve. It will be not all that easy to bring every aspect of the culture which has been lost. But we can also try to reflect to what is that important, which our culture has been following, especially our ancestors, how the cultural norms which they have been doing. Like for instance, here, when before even the rain starts, we have to hold rain-making ceremonies. After that, we go to the farm, we plant, we harvest. Before we even eat a crop from the farm, we also try to hold Thanksgiving ceremonies. Then when we will gather and enjoy the fruits of the season. And these are the cultural norms and values which I think they are very, very important, which we know very well. If we want to achieve the goal for food sovereignty, seed sovereignty, these are all aspects of life which one should really think about. The clothes, we know for us as Africans, we know that our ancestors were wearing these skins, but now we cannot tell our children to go back and uh, make those skins from animals. But let us tell our children that the culture which we are living right now is totally out of order. That is why we are seeing our children not respecting their elders. And these are also critical for one child to be a person with respect, with dignity. And I think that's all for today, John. I think we can talk and talk as much as we can because we are in this world where it is a world of competition with a lot of people trying to look good, forgetting where they're coming from. Thank you, John.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Mayam Pofu. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much, everybody. Big thank you to Nelson and Elizabeth. And thanks to Jade and Shin working hard in the background, as always, and all the organizers, and to all of you for joining and for your remarks and comments and support in the chat. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of the sessions and hope you go and reconnect in a deeper way. Goodbye.